to my immediate left, we have Tiffany Bussey, founding director of Morehouse College Entrepreneurship Center and lead, and Ascend2020 Atlanta. Then to her left, we have Ron Mason, president of the University of the District of Columbia. To his left, we have Chanelle Hardy, strategic outreach and public policy partnerships for Google. And rounding out, we have Chad Womack, the national director for STEM initiatives at UNCF. Please give them a warm welcome. You know, I'm going to get right into it because what I heard from the last panel is that higher ed must change to adapt to the needs of entrepreneurs. I'm going to direct this to Ron Mason first as sort of a broader perspective. What's preventing colleges and universities from taking on a more accelerated model in everyday curriculum?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because we're actually going through that process now. We have a strategic plan that we're going to be bringing to the board in June called the Equity Imperative. And it's really structured around two basic facts. One is that we are an urban university. We're the only urban land grant exclusively in the country. And so in the next 50 years, 80% of the people in the world are going to be in urban areas. A lot of people in very small spaces, and they're going to have a lot of problems that are going to require solutions that are going to offer a lot of opportunities. But the other issue, the other fact that we've accepted is that, you know, America is really, and all American institutions are really built around a basic philosophy, which is a philosophy of white privilege. And if we are going to find ways to develop black and brown talent, which are these vast pools of untapped resources that America really needs, but this challenge of white privilege gets in the way of us being able to see, extract, and develop that talent, we're going to have to be able to become much more flexible, have many more on and off ramps, find alternative paths to developing that talent, because the traditional educational path really hasn't been able to do that, which brings entrepreneurship into the picture.
Right. I actually met you while I was a professor at the University of New Orleans, and I come from, I'm a former faculty member. How do faculty need to change? Because it's what do you tell a faculty member like me who has a tenured position that they're going to have to accelerate their program or adjust their program to develop more entrepreneurs?
So what we're telling them is that the days of being a sage on the stage are really long gone.
Except for now, where I get to be.
Well, you have to. But no, you also have to be a guide on the side. Because today these young people that we faculty are working with come from an entirely different world from the one that we grew up in. You grew up in.
Yeah, that's right.
And we have as much to learn from them as they have from us, and it's that teaching, learning approach to life that really is going to enable our institutions, which are change resistant in the first place. I mean, tenured faculty have lifetime contracts. What's the incentive to change, right? But it's embracing this new mentality of teaching and learning and understanding that the world is changing too fast for you to know everything every time, and you can learn from your students that I think is going to offer the opportunity and the path to change that even the faculty will be able to embrace.
Now, Tiffany, you are the founding director of Entrepreneurship Center at Morehouse. Can you talk about how that evolved and what you're doing to meet the needs of future startup companies and students, entrepreneurs?
Sure. So this has been 15 years in the making at Morehouse. It is, I would say, my own entrepreneurial journey. The leadership of Morehouse recognized very early that we're not just creating or building the next Dr. Martin Luther King or the next Spike Lee, but also the next Paul Judge. And your article, Andres, caused quite a stir for me on campus because you reference others, and they were like, well, we have an alumni base that also are doing tech and whatever. So we recognized early that we had to do something and address this problem. It is in our DNA to do that. So what we've been doing at Morehouse, and as referenced in the first panel, is not only how we do it, but also what we're doing. We've broadly defined entrepreneurship, and that also kind of reflects on the question that you just asked about a faculty. So as a faculty member, I spent about maybe 10 years moving that needle with our own colleagues there in understanding that this whole question around entrepreneurship is not just starting businesses, but the way our students think. Creating things, understanding the innovation process, that I can still be a STEM major and be entrepreneurial. I can still be my humanities major and understand problems that needs to be solved with those. So I'm not telling you you're not going to grad school. I'm not telling you to stop to start a business, but really understanding that whole process of what innovation is and that framework around innovation. Yes, we would like others to start businesses at some point, but we want them to understand the way of thinking. We have more employers coming to us saying, we're looking for those that are entrepreneurial. So we want to teach what that means to be entrepreneurial, understanding problems, creativity, looking at things that really solve issues that are out there, and that's how we have tackled it. On the other part, in how we're paying for it, because that's a big barrier in why we're not doing this, was referenced. So the Entrepreneurship Center actually is, I would say, a consulting shop within the construct of higher ed. We actually do, we're a third-party provider under the DoD Mentor Protege Program. Nice program because it actually allows for HBCUs to work with the IBMs and the Lockheed Martins to help that supplier chain. And we've heard many reference who are growth technology companies right here, many of them in the Washington, D.C. area, that are suppliers to large federal contracts. So I would say over the last 15 years, we've worked with over 200 of these minority tech companies in allowing what we call technical assistance in solving back office type of issues for them, from accounting to marketing to business development. The beauty of it is that students are always involved. So not only are they seeing people that look like them owning these businesses, and they're all probably driving about over $5 million in revenue in the tech space, but also bringing them in the classroom and having these students as interns always on these programs. So, and it really gives us a national footprint because it's not only in Georgia. As a matter of fact, I have no business in Georgia. We charge a market fee for those services, of which the agreement is everything above cost then comes back to support the student entrepreneurial activities that we do, and we could talk a bit more about what that looks like in building out that ecosystem.
Excellent. John, Chad, now, after hearing that, there's still this issue of debt.
Yes.
You know, what I heard also from the last panel, that there's a risk in going to a four-year college that you may not have to take. Can you address that issue because, you know, for the most part, and I'll ask this to the audience, who here has a college degree?
Ooh,
Wow.
Everyone, yes.
Right. So for this circle, it's important.
Yeah.
Right. But many students are now saying, I can't take that on. What's the value proposition particularly for private four-year colleges nowadays?
Well, let me first start by saying thank you for inviting me. I am a very proud Morehouse College graduate. I'm also...
Give Morehouse a hand.
I'm also a very proud graduate of Morehouse School of Medicine. Both my parents went to an HBCU, Cheney State, and I'm very proud to be a member of the UNCF team, where a mind is a terrible thing to waste, but a wonderful thing to invest in. At the UNCF, we think about this all the time. How do we support the post-secondary aspirations of African American students and their families in this country as they seek to transition into some four-year institution? We have as a core value and mission statement to support our member institutions and to support historically black colleges and universities as a whole. In the audience somewhere is a good friend and colleague of mine, Scott Lilly. I don't know if Scott can hear me, or he's back there. He is. Scott works for Thurgood Marshall College Fund, and they are similarly focused on HBCUs and making sure that African American students are able to get to college at HBCUs and successfully transition to and through school. But I think I don't want to so much focus on the debt issue. I think it is an issue. I'm not dismissive of it. But I really want to get to the core fundamental question, which I don't think we've articulated quite well yet, and that is, why do HBCUs exist? You know, we live in the post-civil rights era. It's not post-racial, but it's post-civil rights. The doors are open. You can go anywhere. You may not want to go everywhere, but you can. Of course, constrained by money, sometimes geography. But here's the deal. Our institutions were built with the intent to lift up our community post-slavery. There are historically black colleges besides my own, Morehouse, but there are some absolutely phenomenal stories. Dillard University was built by a former slave, brick by brick. These are our institutions. They belong to us. They represent our cultural aspirations and who we are and who we've been, and therefore who we have yet to become. And so I think in the context of tech and the digital economy and so forth, from an institutional standpoint, HBCUs are it with regards to authentically African-American institutions that reflect who we are as a people.
But is it becoming more expensive to provide that safe space? That's where I'm getting at. And at what point does it become too risky?
Let me flip your question.
Okay.
And ask the inverse. Would it be more expensive if we didn't have HBCUs? What would be the cost? Let's do a thought experiment and wipe away all the HBCUs, all 102 or 4, however you count them. What would happen? Well, black Americans would go to majority institutions. Some would do very well, with or without an HBCU. The majority would encounter some resistance, depending upon where you are, would reflect the degree of resistance that you would encounter. And they would start to turn towards each other and say, gee, how do we create that safe space? And then eventually the conversation would turn to, why don't we have our own institutions? So whether we take the extreme, which is obviously not a reality, thankfully, that we don't have HBCUs, or we take the opposite, where all black students, which was the case some 50, 60, 70 years ago, had no other option than to go to HBCUs. The question is not either or, but both and. How do we balance that reality, and how do we make sure that regardless of where black students want to go, that they can afford it, and that they have the resources and access to the kind of quality teaching and learning environments that are going to prepare them for post-baccalaureate success. I do, just as a professional and personal position, take the view that having a 4-year degree is a good thing. What you choose to do with it is another matter. So what I do for a living is connect our HBCUs, our faculty, and most importantly, our students to places like Silicon Valley, through the HBCU ICE initiative, where we bring over 100 African American computer science majors out to the Valley to connect with companies like Google. And we're appreciative of the reach back that Google has provided. But other companies like Facebook, eBay, interestingly, in places like the Valley, you've got some pretty high-powered African Americans, some from my illustrious alma mater, who actually sit in positions of importance in these companies. I think of Damian Hooper Campbell, who's a Morehouse grad, who's the chief diversity officer for eBay, as an example. And they're actively trying to reach back to the HBCU community to build those bridges that allow students to be in the kind of environments where they can learn, not just how to program, that's obviously important and a requisite skill, but how do you then engage in that professional work environment to launch your career path in the tech industry?
I'm going to go, before I get to Chanelle, I want Ron to address this. is a 2-year HBCU experience becoming more competitive in the market?
So here's the numbers. In the district, a high school degree will get you $30,000 a year.
Right.
The average, the median salary is $60,000 a year, and a bachelor's degree will get you $65,000 a year. And so the big prize is the bachelor's degree if you're trying to build pathways to the middle class, as our mayor would say it, right? But there's on and off ramps along the way. And so the challenge for the privates especially, is the business model is that the market that you're serving doesn't have the wealth and income to keep up with the cost of running the institution. And that's a real challenge, and that goes back to what I was saying about the structural challenges, because HBCUs are really just institutional reflections of black people.
Right.
And so we have the same challenges that the people we serve have, which becomes a real issue down the line. So at UDC, for example, we're building a new kind of institution where you can come in through a workforce training door. And that workforce training door will prepare you to go into an associate's degree program. And that associate's degree program will give you a pathway to a bachelor's degree. And we've had students that have come in through workforce training and the light went off and they ended up getting that bachelor's degree. But the point is that every student that comes in our door, we want to enable them to reach their highest level of human potential, right? But in the long run, we have to build, and this is why we're co-planning now with the public school system in the district, because we have to build a pipeline all the way down to the mothers, really, right? That doesn't have the leaks that the current pipeline has of all of this black and brown talent, so that by the time they get to the college level, most of them have already leaked out of the pipeline. And that goes back to what I was saying about accepting the reality of the fact that America is built on a philosophy of white privilege. And if you accept that philosophy, then by definition, it's going to be very hard to develop and allow black talent to thrive in that kind of a philosophy.
No,
Andre,
go for it.
I think the answer is not necessarily for us to build our 2-year colleges, but partner with them, right? So it does two things. It answers the first question that you asked about the cost. It also cuts that individual's costs by half, because you're doing your 2-year in community college per se, and then by partnering with them, you become the pipeline, and then they're into HBCUs now, and now they're only paying that 2-year tuition as opposed to 4. They still end up with an HBCU matriculation in terms of a graduation, and they're able to still become part of that community. So I think that's a win-win, both for the universities to partner with community college to create that pipeline, and then it's a win for the students that are participating because it cuts the cost for them also.
Chanelle, Google recognizes the value of HBCU grads. You guys established a partnership with Howard University and Howard West. Mm-hmm. And the numbers are clear. HBCU grads, particularly in STEM, are very productive. Talk about that relationship. Why does it exist? What are you trying to get out of it?
Yeah. If I could, I also want to just quickly step back and just add one thing to the conversation, which is, I'm a lawyer who is definitely not a STEM graduate, but maybe STEAM because I majored in English and piano, right? And I think that it's important for us to note in the conversation about skill building and tech that there are huge numbers of jobs in the tech sector that are not for those with a STEM background necessarily, right? There certainly are folks like one of my colleagues and dear friends at Google who is a black man who has an engineering degree and a law degree, so he's just crushing it in a couple of powerful ways. But certainly at our company, nearly half the roles do not require a tech background. And so I think that's also an important part of the conversation. I have more I can say on that maybe later. In terms of Howard West, I think what's great about that story is that it kind of started from, you were talking about high-placed black individuals in Silicon Valley, and so you might have heard of I think his title is head of corporate corporate development for Alphabet, our parent company, but David Drummond, black man, and Forbes did a profile on black men in the C-suite a few years ago where they talked about what GM did, right? Where GM really partnered very, very closely historically with HBCUs, such that the gentleman who was, at the time of the writing of the article, VP of design for GM, had literally written to GM as a little boy with a drawing of a Cadillac that he found inspiring and said, how do I get a job there? And they said, keep practicing your drawing and go to Howard, because the teachers there have such a relationship, the faculty there, that they could help design a curriculum that would make him competitive for GM. And so that was an example that David used in helping us to take our first foray into partnerships with HBCUs, which was the Google Earn Residence program, which is where we took volunteer engineers and embedded them in HBCUs to work on some of those curriculum matching issues that we talked about. And then with more, and honestly, this is kind of Google culture, but also in addition to kind of wanting to expand the pipeline, you also had these strong black leaders internally that were saying we need to try to not only address the curriculum gap, but some of those culture and relationship building fit issues that we talk about as well. So we worked with a lot of great folks to bring our first class out to the Valley last year. It was 26 students. They did a semester program with a highly motivated, enthusiastic group of Googlers. At the end of that, 14 of them applied for the software engineering internship. 5 were given an offer and 5 accepted. That was that example of, oh, we tried it, it worked well, so now we've announced that we'll be expanding it. In September, we'll begin a year-long program. We'll be expanding it to additional schools. And so
I think that's the future of part of higher ed.
I think so.
Yep.
I think so.
I mean, I can definitely see that. I want to actually get it, stay with you and get into the skills. You said there are multiple jobs in Google and many similar companies. But what are some of the skills you look for in a student coming from college that you expect them to have? And to add to that, and what are some gaps you see in students coming from college?
So again, since I'm not in HR at all, I'm going to give you some high-level thoughts. But I would say that what I find inspiring and a reason for optimism as a very proud HBCU law school grad is that a lot of the skills are things that I think HBCUs are particularly good at teaching. So there was actually a good article I wanted to reference where it released our top 8, because we're always data-driven, top 8 set of skills that we're looking for in employees. And any guesses how many of them had to do with tech?
None.
One. So the skills were being a good coach, communicating and listening well, possessing insights into others, particularly others of different values and points of view, having empathy toward and being supportive of colleagues, and being a good critical thinker and problem solver, and being able to make connections across complex ideas. And so the entrepreneurial spirit and creativity is extremely important in Google. There is definitely always encouragement to come up with a great idea, whether it's a great product idea, a product enhancement, or an idea on how we just do business more effectively. So those skills are some of the top skills. I think as a result of that, it is, to the extent that I participate in conversations where there are gaps, I think there are definitely gaps, honestly, even in confidence, right? And that the interview process can be daunting, and that the process of, becoming effective can also be daunting, and that having those opportunities to practice, to have mentoring and networking and relationship building with folks who are in those roles are super important.
Tiffany, about this mindset training, tell me what you're doing in the entrepreneurial system and center, and how is that influencing Morehouse, the larger college?
Sure. So I think to the points that were made, exposure, 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 right? We can't have enough of that. Definitely getting our students out to Google. We participate with Chad and his program in exposing these students, but also bringing the entrepreneurs on campus. So Rodney mentioned our new launch of the OHUB space on campus. That's very, very key for us. So we've had little silos and pockets of things happening. This whole idea of creating this space where students can now come and collaborate and create a community is very key. I think that once they start seeing people that look like them, start seeing other students that have the same ideas, it creates that generation of ideas and things like that. So we're definitely doing it with what I call co-curriculum programs, such as the teaming with the OHUB and that. The other side is the curricula program. So we don't have a major or a minor. We're moving towards a minor. Not that I really am a big fan of that, because the students that really want to embrace entrepreneurship and to go out and start businesses are not necessarily the ones doing it for credit. We would love the credit part, because that helps you matriculate through your program. But we do have 3 classes that we offer. The fundamentals of entrepreneurship, which Rodney will be teaching in the fall. So we're very happy to have him as an adjunct professor doing that. We have social entrepreneurship, which we talk about social ventures and getting into all those other opportunities. And for us, which also is going to be new, is how early do we touch our students with this whole mindset of understanding that how to think, how to bring in the critical thinking piece. We have to touch them earlier. And so we're launching, as part of our gen ed curriculum, this whole idea of the entrepreneurial mindset and touching all freshmen. So once you graduate, you would have had at least one touch point with understanding what this mindset is about, and critical thinking, working in teams, understanding that wherever my background or major is, I can do it. So the idea is to integrate these programs and not necessarily to kind of segregate them out, but to infuse it with the political science, to infuse it with the STEM, to infuse it in those particular class. And those are some of the ways we're looking to really redesign our curriculum around that.
Ron, you have a capital builders program.
I was going to say, that's an interesting project we just became involved in. We're partnering with Thurgood Marshall College Fund and the Gallup organization. And Gallup has these assessment tools that they've developed that identify strengths. And they have one called BP10, which is supposed to identify young people with a high knack for entrepreneurship. And so we've tested, or will test, every high school graduate in the district, and we're going to find the top 20 who have these entrepreneurial talents, and we're going to put them in a full ride scholarship program with a computer and a suit, and give them in a credit-bearing course of study, and then give them the opportunity to leave at the end of 18 months if they're able to and start a business. And we think this is going to be very interesting, because these assessments, unlike most standardized tests, do not correlate to race and class. And so what I found most interesting was that when we gave this last round of assessments, in Ward, if you know the district, Ward 7 and 8 are the highest concentrations of poverty and people of color. And so we don't get a lot of students from there because they don't go to college. But when we ran this assessment, most of the high performers came out of Ward 7 and 8. So when I was saying about being able to find other ways to identify, extract, and develop talent, those are the kinds of things we're looking at, because if we can do 20 of these a year, and you understand that economies are built off of small businesses, and you build an entire university around small business opportunities and sustainability, sustainability needs of cities, engineers who have an entrepreneurial mindset while they're going to school, and then develop products that start businesses once they graduate. I mean, we're shaping this whole university around other ways to identify, extract, and develop talent that don't necessarily rely on the normal ways of doing that.
No, Chad, I want you to quickly, because we're going to get to questions generally shortly. I'm also interested in HBCUs changing the culture of entrepreneurialism, because for me, the historical value of HBCUs was this sense of, we're keenly aware of white supremacy, bigotry, racism. And capitalism hasn't been our greatest friend in a lot of ways. What, in terms of this mindset, what are students bringing to the marketplace that could enhance the overall ability for folks to be absorbed fairly?
Let's make some observations. One, every market that African Americans have entered, we've transformed it. Every single one. And with 44, President Obama, we've transformed the political landscape as well. Unfortunately, that didn't last. Hopefully it will resurface 2 years from now. But we don't enter a space and leave it the same way it was before we enter. The last frontier is what we're talking about, in my opinion. And my observation is that black students, regardless of whether they are at HBCUs or majority institutions, understand that they're African American in this society well before they arrive on campus. And I think we bring our culture with us wherever we go. And so that interaction between who we are as a folk and the environment that we're in is the space in which entrepreneurship can flourish. Mm-hmm. It's up to us as folks who operate programs and institutions and organizations to help identify. So what President Mason's talking about with that interesting program is fascinating to me, and it's not surprising to me that Ward 7 and 8 would have the highest index of entrepreneurship. Well, if you went to Philly, it would be West Philly and North Philly. If you went to Baltimore, it would be East Baltimore. If you went to Chicago, it would be South. We try to figure out how to survive wherever we are, right? So I think our institutions
we're entrepreneurial,
yeah,
in many ways, because we have to be.
It's what we do.
But I would say this, you asked this other question, and I want to give a shout out to all the people who every day think about this stuff and are actually rolling up their sleeves, getting to work. So what Tiffany's doing at Morehouse, what Rodney's doing in Atlanta, what folks are doing around the country, what Aisha and Jarvis are doing with STEM Board, what the K-Port Center out in Oakland is doing. I mean, there's a variety, there's an ecosystem of folks out there doing some really cool, interesting, and powerful stuff. My comment to my own community is that they're not connected, and that's a problem. And we also need to fund in a sustainable way these efforts so that folks aren't operating hand to mouth. But having said that, our institutions could serve as hubs that could help drive ecosystem development that would then connect to regional ecosystems, if not national and global. But we ourselves have to have a different mindset. And we're gonna have to figure out how to work together and leverage the resources and capital that we have to make sure that transformational thinking, and I think Tiffany's point about the entrepreneurial mindset is on point. We need to have that mindset within our own community.
Chanelle?
I just wanted to quickly make a point because when Mark was giving the presentation and talking about the two keys were one, building these high IT, I think it was pipeline systems, but then also having pipelines for basic digital skills for underrepresented communities, and just wanted to quickly note that that's one of the things that we've also made a commitment to do much, much better to the tune of $1 billion commitment over the next 5 years. But one example that I wanted to share, because I think it really speaks to the tremendous motivation and drive that folks have to develop these basic digital skills. One thing that we noticed when you're looking at that kind of opportunity and skills match was the need for folks who can do IT tech support in the tech sector, right? And these jobs are at least $52,000 a year on average, right? and it does not require a 4-year degree. And so we partnered with Coursera, which offers online trainings, to offer a 8 to 12 month IT tech support training, which would give you a recognized credential at the end, and then you would be we would work to do an employer match. So we launched this very, very recently. I need to get the exact date, but there were just a few stats that I thought spoke to it. One is it was the largest first day launch of first-time users in Coursera's history. And the majority of those who enrolled were from non-traditional backgrounds. There are 30,000 people enrolled so far. There are 9 employers in the hiring consortium so far, and it continues to grow. And even though this is an 8 to 12 month program and we're only 3 months in, 500 people have already completed the program. Wow. So I think it just speaks to the fact that we talked a lot about exposure, and making this information available as soon as folks find out really will take advantage of those opportunities.
We're going to go to questions, and I already have one right here. My colleague, Makeda Henry-Nicky, is also working on these issues.
Hi, I'm Makeda Henry-Nicky, a Rubenstein Fellow, as Andre said, here in Brookings Governance Studies. And so what I really want, I am also a proud graduate of HBCU, Howard University. And every time I hear Howard, my heart warms because I love that institution so much, right? Here's my question, though, and it's about the social contract between HBCUs and the majority of African-American students that attend HBCUs and so derive that value there, as well as the trend that I've seen, and so we all are aware of, HBCUs beginning to lose their accreditation because the context, the skills market, the labor market, the economic market has changed and put the fundamentals of HBCUs at great risk. So 2 years ago, I read an article about a student suing her law school because of those inflated job to salary numbers that are mixed with high profile attorney positions, but with attorneys who failed and became bartenders and waitresses, and all those numbers are mixed in together. Her case made it to trial, and that's pretty significant because the social contract for her failed between her and the university that she selected. So the question is, Isaiah, and I think Jeff's comments made me think about how you came about your IT coding skills, how you accumulated Python and R. So Google can take IT and maybe list it as one of 5 because you are a market maker. For the rest of the employers who are not makers and are takers, the social contract is really important around what are the kinds of skills, what are the kinds of standardized skills that we are endowing our graduates with, because the pipeline is a symptom. It is not the root cause of the issue. And so I really would like to kind of hear about the social contract between HBCUs and us as students entering, as well as among HBCUs as a very small ecosystem. And we're seeing some of us falling out, and that doesn't activate Howard or Morehouse.
Chad, can you address that?
Sure, I think it's a great question. Let me say this. At the UNCF, we have endeavored to answer that and address that issue in a couple different ways. I brought a program called the HBCU Startup and Innovation Initiative out of the White House to the UNCF that eventually rolled up with Thurgood Marshall College Fund and APLU, Association of Public and Land Grant Universities, in the form of a program called ICE, Innovation, Commercialization, and Entrepreneurship. And at the core of the HBCU ICE initiative was this issue of how do we address the changing landscape of the tech workforce and the demands that tech companies put on the skill sets that are required to enter the digital economy through workforce. How do we address those needs as they are moving with the needs for African American students who are in STEM majors? To Chanelle's point, for every one STEM major, there's probably 2 or 3 other students, non-STEM, who also should have similar opportunities to get into the tech industry as well. But there are a core set of skills and literacies, if you will, that are required in order to succeed at that level. So the work that we've been doing for the past 5-6 years has been connecting our campuses, our faculty, and our students to Silicon Valley, to companies like Google and others, to address that head on. Howard West, and now there's another initiative that we're working on that will broaden the aperture, if you will, of engagement with HBCUs called HBCU West, that will involve also more companies, is an initiative that we have been working on with Thurgood Marshall and APLU to address. The second thing I'll say is at UNCF, we've been working on trying to identify what are those specific skill sets across industries and knowledge domains. That initiative is called the Career Pathways Initiative. So if you go to UNCF's website and look up CPI, you'll see that. That's now, I think, in year 3. It's headed up by Dr. Brian Bridges and a whole team of folks that are working with companies and with HBCUs to address that gap. So I want to make sure that we know, your question is a very good one, but we are trying to address that head on. Last point I'll make is this. Dealing with faculty at any institution is a challenge.
Somebody said,
And so, and the reason why I say that is not to berate faculty, but, and I think President Mason smiles because I'm sure he's had some battles on his campus. But here's the deal. There are faculty on our respective campuses that want to change, that are trying to align their curriculum with not just what students need to know, but know how to do. Because the rest of the world could care less so much about the piece of paper. What they care about is what value are you bringing, how you add value to the business bottom line. And so that is a conversation I think all higher eds are having. I don't want us to pick on HBCUs. I think predominantly white schools struggle with that. And let's remind ourselves, the great Harvard University let $2 billion companies walk off its campus, right? So even Ivy League institutions struggle to change. By definition, institutions are conservatively organized and structured, so it's hard. But I want to leave this point with some positive affirmation that there are faculty and leaders like President Mason and others that are actually trying to make change. So what we need to do is help support them and make those connections real between academic universities and industry.
Can I just say one thing in defense also of HBCUs, and I'll be super short, but I actually transferred from a PWI law school to Howard University School of Law, and I am confident that I would not be where I am today had it not been for that change. I went from being an institution where law was very depressing, frankly, to going into an institution where we were taught that a lawyer had 2 alternatives: to be a parasite on society or a social engineer. And so that is what has given me the ability to think critically and passionately and with enthusiasm about what opportunities are available to me as someone who is legally trained, and why I have almost entirely not worked in the practice of law. I have had a series of opportunities that have been extremely empowering and have allowed me to serve the community and to be able to be a social engineer. So I look back at that and say, I finally paid off those loans last year, but I am really grateful that I had that opportunity. That's a big
Man, we only have time for one question before closing remarks, and we'll go with my man. Sorry, I apologize, but this has been engaging, and it has to be quick.
Yeah.
It has to be right on.
I'm a Morehouse man, so it's hard to do that. Curtis Valentine with the Progressive Policy Institute. And my question is, how do we use what we talked about today to make the lives of others who are not in tech better? I think about Morehouse College. I think about the West End of Atlanta. Morehouse men will graduate 500 Morehouse men in less than 2 weeks. 99% of them are going to leave. People are going to come. The West End has been the same way for the last 50 years. How do we, as alumni, as Morehouse men, as HBCU grads, take what we're talking about today to help the K-12 system in Atlanta and everywhere around the country? How do we make, food? How do we, reduce food deserts, create healthcare, returns? How do we do that to make sure that we're not just the ones talking about this in a silo, but everyone benefits?
Great question.
I'm going to quickly say that we are addressing that. So yesterday we had a conference on campus looking at entrepreneurship and mass incarceration. One of the programs that we currently do is working right outside our gates with the West End community, as you've pointed out, through Ascend2020, and we didn't get a chance to talk about that, which is a program funded by JP Morgan Chase. We are working with community businesses along with tech businesses. One of the premises premise is that we could not address this issue just looking at tech companies. So we're looking at Main Street company businesses also. They actually come on Morehouse campus. We select 20 of the neighborhood businesses, and we take them through a program of understanding the back office of running what it is that they're solving within those community. Two things it does. It also introduces our students to support those businesses, because we had that gap also. Our students they were taking Uber to go to Buckhead, right, to the businesses there. Now they understand the businesses right outside our gates and to help that community. That is going to be part of it. The other is, how do we scale what we're doing at Morehouse? I appreciate the applause and the recognition, but I think it's important to take it beyond Morehouse to all the HBCUs, to other communities, right? And we need to answer that question. How do we scale and take what we're doing and to replicate it at these other institutions? And that's probably how we solve part of what we're talking about.
That's a great way to close this session, because again, going back to the opening, this is about how can we leverage colleges and universities for communities writ large. This is about building upon the assets in communities for community. So please give this panel a warm thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.